The next session is focused on the persistence of gender-based violence, health and safety in the public space. It is a difficult session, but a necessary one. It is a difficult discussion, but I'm sure it's going to be a very fruitful one. And I'd like to call the participants, our speakers, to this panel. I'd like to welcome Sofia Bekatoru, psychologist, double Olympic medalist in sailing. Thank you for being here. Maria Skangu, Vice Chair, Board of Directors at Vodafone. Thank you so much for being here. Kiki Petroulaki, psychologist, Board of Director, President at the European Anti-Violence Network. Thank you. And Natalia Theodoulou, Public Reforms Advisor at the Hellenic Corporation of Assets and Participations. Thank you all so much. I think I will sit down for the rest of the session. Lounge, Women on Top, Stella and Penelope, for the selection of this year's theme. I think health and safety and the intersection between healthcare, and gender issues and inclusivity is a very important one, but one that does not get discussed as much as it should. And I think the first panel gave us a very, very good example of all of the different ways in which these two issues intersect on a daily basis. Now, our session will focus on some difficult issues, violence, the gender-based violence that we often encounter in public spaces. And as such, I'd like to start with a question to you, Sofia. Public spaces are, by definition, more visible than the private sphere. And yet, gender-based violence seems to persist even in these settings. What does that say about how safe women are in our society at the moment?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the invitation. It is really a big honor to be among this amazing panel and listening to all the issues that our society needs to pay more attention to. Actually, it is interesting how the circle of violence is mutated through the social representation. Because when something is private and we have doubts whether it's good or bad, we usually keep it a secret up to the point that we feel confident about its quality. When something is acceptable, there is no resistance in the public discourse. So when in our daily life we experience abusive behavior at work, for example, but there is no counteraction from the social environment and justice, we assimilate this behavior as acceptable. Having said that, let's see an example. Let's say a female manager reports domestic violence by her boss. Now, the victim could be any gender. Let's assume there is an internal procedure and the final report by the safeguarding committee of that company, assuming there is one, declares that the incident is not legally liable. So the case is closed. Both parties remain at their position, and soon after, the victim is fired. How does this incident affect our perception? Firstly, we observe the victim dealing with consequences that affect their working status. Secondly, we hear a big fuss and cancelling behaviors for the perpetrator. Soon after the social discussion and headlines, we see the perpetrator remaining in his position and the victim losing her job. There are 1,000 cases which repeat the same pattern. The victim is secondarily victimized and life goes on. I believe that unless there are legal procedures in a logical time frame and safeguarding policies in place that protect both the involved parties, we will unlikely experience a shift in our mentality.
Thank you so much for your response. I think the strategies to deal with this issue will be discussed in this session. But before diving into some of the solutions, I'd like us to understand the problem a little bit better. And I have a question for Kiki Petroulaki. Can you give us a better idea of what the most common forms of gender-based violence are, especially in Greek society, but also on how important a part of the equation psychological violence is, because we often think about violence and just think about physical violence. Psychological violence, verbal violence, these are important elements, right?
Yes, and we have to have in mind always that all type of violence includes psychological violence. If I'm being sexually abused or physically abused, I'm also psychologically abused. Or the children who witness the abuse of a mother, they are abused children. So when we are talking about public, first of all, we have to define public, because we all understand some public spaces. But let's say the apartment building where I live and they hear my abuse when I'm being abused. Is it public space? Or the police station where I'm going to report, the coroner's office, the shelter where I live with other women and other children, are they public spaces? They are. The media, the social media, they are all public spaces. And now, the latest years, women more and more, they bring in public their experience of abuse without so much shame and guilt as the previous years. And this is a great achievement. I think it's your achievement, Sofia.
Indeed.
You start this thing. And whenever I'm reading about a child who has been harassed and reported immediately that my teacher, my neighbor harassed me or attacked me, I always think this is the real gain from this. So the most common forms in Greek society is sexism, it's sexual harassment, it is victim blaming, and it also is secondary victimization by all these organizations who are there to support and protect the victims. And this is really peculiar because the abusers never abuse in public. So if they do it always secretly, how come we all here have seen a woman that is being harassed publicly, sexually harassed, in buses, in family gatherings, in the workspaces, or being ordered in a family dinner, or being insulted, being whatever, name it. This is because they don't consider it abuse. They think it's their right, and that's why they are doing it publicly, because otherwise they don't do it. And they don't do it because they want to protect themselves, the batterers, I mean, not to have witnesses, and also because they have great self-control. I will come back to it.
Absolutely, and I think it's fascinating that you give us this perspective of the private space and the public space not being so separate after all, because we have come across things that we consider to be private in the public sphere. That stops us from interfering and interacting with these instances oftentimes, but that could be part of the problem. Now, a public space, let's say, in which most of us spend a very big chunk of our daily life is the office, is the workspace. How safe are women in the workplace right now? Is it a safe space for women in Greece? Maria?
So, workplace is to an extent the mirror of the society. So if we consider that Greek society is not always safe for women, same applies also to the workplace. Having said that, it was really interesting the way that Sophia described, let's say, a case. So someone that says it has been harassed and how this has been treated. And so I would say that, as we said, we mirror society, but at the same time, businesses have a specific duty of care. So when we have to train, we have to educate, we have to drive change. So for instance, we might have the case that we do not at all times be able to substantiate, let's say, a criminal offense. But it might be an issue of a breach of code of conduct within a corporation. So, for instance, in the Vodafone case, now I'm discussing about my organization, which is the thing that I can tell about. We have a speak-up process, which means that someone can go and can also give, a kind of anonymized first
like
complaint. Yes, and describe, the facts under which he or she has been victimized, or what happened, and so on and so forth. There is a specific investigation committee, which does not include necessarily or only HR or the line manager of this person. There is a specific process, and at the end of the day, if we have a breach of code of conduct and things that have to do with behavior are paramount within the code of conduct, that means that there will be disciplinary actions, and at the end of the day, it will be, the person that has actually harassed that will be out of the business, out of the office. Even in the cases that we do not have a substantiation, some HR measures will be taken within this specific part of the organization. And finally, because you mentioned that there is a very critical point, this is what provides safety to people. You can never fire a person that has, for a specific period of time, which is at least 1 year, if he or she has filed a complaint. So within the speak-up process, irrespective of whether it has been substantiated or not. So that means the victim actually cannot be fired from the company for a year or so. So first thing is to have, a specific process which actually protects the disclosure of the event, which is the first thing, and then does not actually victimize the victim in a second phase the way that you clearly described. Also, it is quite important, because we are discussing about that, we are discussing about the number of women within the organizations. Also, in an environment that is more equal, it is obvious that women are more safe. And to that respect, I think that having quota, or at the end of the day, having women in leadership positions, it is something that makes a difference. So in our case, we have almost 50% of senior management roles within women, and 3 out of 5 members of the board of directors are women. So it provides a comfort, because if you have a woman manager, even if she's not your line manager, you can always have a recourse to that person who has a specific authority. And because you mentioned that, public space and private space are really interconnected, we have a hybrid working model. So in a sense, we have actually a flexible way of working. Women can work, or all our employees can work remotely certain days of the week. And but we are keen to provide also protection to women that may suffer not in the workplace, but in their own homes. So we have a specific advisory board. We have specific help for women that might be victims of abuse in their own homes, and they can come to the employer and discuss about that.
It's very, very interesting, because we tend to think about what happens in the workplace as the only instance of gender-based violence, but then these women go back home. Yeah. And the office is a space where you can create solutions that bring them out of the woods and create the right environment for them to make their claims and seek help.
In other countries, Vodafone has provided specific shelters for women. That was allowed by the legislation there, so a private company could provide shelters for women that have been abused. And In our case, we do have, a kind of advisory board. We provide support, and we have 10 days paid leave, additional to the annual leave, to the extent that we have a woman that has suffered and she wants to leave.
Okay.
And, well, probably the abuser might come to her office, so to the place of work. So we actually provide them the chance to leave the office and be paid for a certain period of time in order to be protected.
That's so important, and I think listening to you, Maria, I realized just how thoughtful a process it can be. Because, it's one thing to just say we have a policy for these issues, but it's quite another to really, really think about all of these little stops along the way, all of the issues that come about, and real policy can only work that way. Now, corporate policies and company culture clearly influence the persistence of gender-based violence. How do these how are these two spaces interconnected?
Thank you for this question. That follows the previous one. It has been already stressed how corporate policies can influence the persistence of base gender violence. In Growth Fund, having a portfolio of 17 diverse companies that offer mostly public service, we have encountered different cultures. So while corporate policies set the operational foundation, so in order to address this issue in an operational way, we have to distinguish the role of culture in introducing and sustaining safe ways when addressing an issue that is followed by stereotypes and biases. So let me illustrate that as quoting Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So one must have a consistent and a coherent action plan endorsing all elements in a company's culture. That means that also leaders should set an example, and the company culture should be consistent and in line with company policies. Otherwise, we risk diluting the currency of trust that is required to address such a sensitive and multifaceted issue as gender-based violence in the workplace.
Thank you so much. And I think this idea of trust as being the big facilitator in all of this is very, very important, and having people that you can trust along the way to seek help and enter your recovery journey from an experience like this. And I'd like to come back to you, Sophia. I think we are all eternally grateful to you for opening up this big discussion on some of these issues in Greece. And I'm sure you can give us a very, very accurate picture of the psychological effects that gender-based violence has on women and how important access to care is to get them on track in their recovery journey.
Thank you for this question. Victims of gender-based violence experience trauma regardless their gender. So the impressive is that we can actually see in an MRI, if we were doing one, that people who experience trauma, they have some idle areas in their brain compared to healthy people. So as a consequence of that, we can see victims choosing specific behaviors and have particular reactions to stimulus. They're also extremely sensitive and act with the flight or fight mode in any condition that can remind them similar conditions with the ones they experienced in the abusive environment. As a result, they keep repeating a pattern that usually leads to the same result and a new attempt to avoid anything that reminds them violence. And therefore, they frequently prefer to avoid any new experience or interact with people. That's why they stay on the site. They usually suffer from post-trauma disorder, and they have symptoms of depression, anxiety, memory gaps, panic attacks, eating disorders, and so many other things. In Greece, the recovery journey starts brutally with the secondary abuse through the social services, because there are no trauma-informed protocols in place. For example, if you are a domestic violence victim and you want to report your husband and you don't have a safe place to stay overnight with your child, what can you do? First, you need to have a specific health test. That's the real system, what now exists. And then, if there is a free space in the safety house, you can enter. In Iceland, for example, a country that leads the list of domestic violence protection, has safe houses that victims can enter at any time without restriction. Victims are treated not as a lower category of people who suffer because of their own fault. They are treated as decent people, like every one of us, who were very unfortunate to live in abusive conditions, and who, if they will be supported for some period of time, they will be able to recover and become independent again. In countries who have trauma-informed protocols, treat people who are witnessing violence also as victims, because it is very naive to believe that children who live in abusive environments and who have seen one parent being victimized, that they psychologically remain healthy. In fact, research proves the opposite. It is difficult to create trauma-informed protocols. In fact, not so much. We just need to have a cross-sectoral collaboration so that victims minimize their time in logistics and in unpleasant living conditions, so they can focus on rehabilitation, feeling safe, becoming confident again. Can we easily understand the lack of our social services? Yes. How? By visualizing living in a safe house, now that we are talking, in the current circumstances. Some 30 houses, many times damaged, unfriendly, cold, and offensive environment. Do we want to live in such a place? I don't think so. So if we create safe spaces like the ones we like to live in, then we can easily solve the problem.
Thank you so much. And your reference to these safe spaces and where women go when they seek refuge from these situations is so important. I think if you haven't visited one, you don't understand just how important it is to create a really, really warm environment, a caring environment, and an environment where a victim or a survivor of that kind of abuse can really thrive and get back on their feet. And oftentimes, it's an entire family that has to live in these spaces. So I think all of us can really, really empathize and relate to how important a part of the journey that is.
It's not a matter of history. It's a matter of feeling home when you go in. So it should be something that we feel warm in, welcome, and that we are not treated as a secondary class of people.
And that being said, I have to say that people working in these spaces really do the best they can sometimes with limited resources to create that feeling of home. And it's important to support them even further in that process. Now, shifting gear a little bit, and since we're entering the area of strategies and solutions to these issues, Kiki, what strategies have been used to reduce gender-based violence, and what are the mechanisms that can help us deal with it more effectively?
As a matter of fact, to reduce, you should know the magnitude. Mm-hmm. And as the previous table also discussed, we don't have data for that. So the first thing we have to do is to measure the extent, to do something. a lot of something, interventions, then to evaluate. In Greece, we have allergy to evaluation, in fact, in people, in processes, whatever, and to have to see the impact, what the impact is on the magnitude. But this should be made at regular time intervals. For example, the latest survey that we have for Greece is since 2011, the FRA survey, which was made for every member state and published on 14. So it's now 12 years, let's say. About what we have to do primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention of that. When we are talking about primary prevention, we need to target to gender equality, because gender inequality is the cause and the consequence of gender-based violence, especially the intimate partner violence. And this means not since birth of a child, but since before pregnancy of a child. But this is a work that you have to do in all levels of society. And we are a patriarchal society, a deep patriarchal society, even if we like to say that we have achieved equality. So there are some efforts. School has a great role since kindergarten to identify, to change stereotypes, but this doesn't mean one discussion in special days against violence or Women's Days that we call an expert to speak to the children. Means very well designed and evaluated interventions. And I bring with me some examples of this. For example, this is a project for school, for high school. Can be also made for primary school. It has its own, I knew this will happen to me. It has its own CD, but also its own website, which is Gender Equality Awareness Raising Against Intimate Partner Violence. This is the title. So, Antonia has also some copies, and we can give them later on to you. This is for educators. They are working with this the whole year to deconstruct the stereotypes and to build equality among the genders, because this is the only key if you want to stop it. Secondary prevention means to identify it the time it starts to begin and do something for this to stop it. And also, we have to deal with impunity. And this includes justice, because as a legal proverb said, justice delayed is justice denied. And this is especially true in domestic violence with women, with children. When your child, after 5 years, is still in a transit phase, this is really difficult for everybody. And when we are seeing examples like Siragakis, Greek people know what I mean, that after 12 and a half years, he released from prison after abusing 36 children, and he has released before in 8.5 years. That means 3 months prison per every child's rape, and now 4 months, or something like this. So this is things that we have to handle.
I think the importance of combating impunity is key, and sometimes it doesn't get talked about as much as it should. The impact that has, the idea that you see things like this happening again and again, and no real change, no real repercussions.
And this is also a message to perpetrators, because when they feel nobody can do that, they have a right.
Of course,
nobody
that is
doing anything to them.
Absolutely. Now, obviously the causes of gender-based violence are very, very deep. But we encounter it every day, and we have to have very, very specific strategies of dealing with it, with such instances when they happen. The Vodafone Foundation came up with one such strategy, the Panic Button app. And I would like us to hear a bit more about how the idea came about and what it does, what its purpose is.
So I'm really happy because we are discussing about the Panic Button in this room, because actually the Panic Button was launched last year in Delphi Forum in this specific room. So we have announced that last year, and we are really, really happy that actually it happened. So in a sense, that was on the basis of a discussion that we had at a certain point in time with the Ministry of Labour and Social Relations, discussing how we might help in cases that we have registered cases of abused persons. So women that, in a sense, have encountered harassment or violence, and they have contacted an authority or a counseling center, but then they came back to their home. We know that this is something that it's really common. So women may go and file a complaint or ask for some help, and then they go back to the abuser for family reasons, for millions of reasons. It's beyond the scope of this discussion. And what we thought is that if these women, who at the end of the day will be in real danger as to their health, could have an easy help through technology. So in a sense, the Panic Button is an encrypted app that they can have on their mobile. It is irrespective of your network, so it has nothing to do with Vodafone or whatever, it's a foundation thing. And it actually gives a signal to the police station in their specific area in order that they can come and help her. Actually, it's a geolocation thing, so they give you, through the encrypted app, they push the button and they get the help. Now, this was actually a great collaboration with us, the Ministry of Labour, the Ministry of State, and of course the Ministry of Δημόσιας Τάξης, the Civil Protection of Protection of Citizens. And it has been provided so far to the women in the regions of Thessaloniki and Athens that have been registered. And we hope, because we provided this as a donation, we hope that the Greek state will use it all over Greece.
It's a great example of the state and private sector collaborating to find solutions to real issues. So I hope more people get to hear about it and know that it exists and can be super, super helpful in these instances. Now, our speakers have touched upon it so far, the importance of education and training, because it's always part of the solution. And starting early with a lot of these issues, as you said, Kiki, is imperative. Natalia, do you see education and training as being a big part of the solution to gender-based violence specifically?
Of course. And talking about youth, Kiki already has covered the subject. The next battlefield after school and university is the workplace. So education must be continued and training. It concerns both employers and employees. We don't have to extract employers out of the picture because they are setting an example. And of course, we must first target those who are involved in matters of equality and work safe environment who are dealing with these issues in the company. In Growth Fund, we thought that we raised this issue by make it visible. We launched a handbook along with the scientific support of Women on Top for preventing and combating sexual harassment and violence in the workplace, mostly deriving from the recent legislation context, because we want to walk an extra mile on top of the procedures that are compelled by the state, such as policies, distinct policies for this issue. The handbook raises awareness on key sexual harassment issues, even for the bystander, and illustrates examples of such behaviors. So, as I was certain that was a good move, after presenting it to our companies, and one colleague of mine in our companies said to me, male, I may say that he was male, very interesting handbook, but we probably won't make a use of it because we don't have such cases in our company. So, well, I'll say that until you properly educate and inform those in your charge, your people, and provide a report mechanism, you can't tell whether you have such cases or not in your company.
Thank you. That is a very, very important message to convey. I think we are slightly running out of time, so we have 5 to 6 minutes left, right, for a very, very fast final round in our discussion. And I'll ask you to keep the answers a little bit shorter, so we can finish on time. Sophia, the media. A big part of this equation is how the media portrays these instances and perhaps even perpetuates this gender-based violence inadvertently. How does this connection work, and how do you see social media fitting into this picture? Because it's been a lever of change. It allowed some of these stories to gain more attention, but it can also be quite a toxic space.
I mean, this is a very controversial question. From one hand side, they provide an accessible platform to speak up and transfer the message in a very short time. On the other hand side, they do it often in such an intrusive way without respecting the human rights of the victim. They need to have a story that sells, and in that aspect, they forget the problems that they are creating after with the whole publicity. Victims are very often exposed in more danger after unveiling the story, and they have no safeguarding policies that can actually protect them. The cancelling policy usually also reproduces hate and violence itself, and so the circle of violence keeps being repeated.
A lot of food for thought for us on how we interact with the media and social media in particular. Maria, the role of technology, part of it is through social media, but do you see it as a factor for creating public and private spaces that are free of these types of violence?
So, I think we discussed a bit, all of us, around the mere fact that awareness is the first thing. So technology can help on that. You can provide, millions of things that are useful in order to identify what is going on and get help and whatever. After the creation of the panic button, we actually created an additional app which is called Bright Sky. It is called Bright Sky because in a sense it has to be covered. So it is covered as a weather application. Within this app, a woman can find either, questions and answers, either information about centers that she can ask help, or advice, or psychological support, or whatever. And the interesting thing is that as soon as we launched the app, there was a lady that called to our scientific sponsor of the project and said, I had not realized that I was a victim and I had been abused until I did the test that I have on the first page of the app. Sometimes it's as simple as that.
And as hard as that at the same time, at the very same time. Kiki, one last question for you on how the state and NGOs, such as the Anti-Violence Network, the European Anti-Violence Network, can work together in this respect to provide solutions.
I'm sorry that I don't have time to answer this.
just a very quick.
So, the short question, the short answer is that in Greece we don't have mentality of collaborating with NGOs. I'm speaking about the state. And this has the problem that they don't want to take the valuable information that we have. And this is also happening when they design and when you evaluate. And this is a problem because they design for women without the women. And we are doing a lot of things. One is this book that we have right for women themselves. Because imagine, it's like a chain, the support and protection system. It's like a chain. You have to fulfill all eligibility criteria. If you manage to do that, you go to the next sector. And then you have to bring the information from the one. Then you have to convince them to give you what you need. And if you manage this also, you go to the next. So the woman is our coordinator, coordinates police, justice, support center, specialist, or general. And this is a fabulous project that we have right now, which is EA Grants, the Active Citizens Fund for Greece, which tries to do exactly this, to bring all the public domains and us NGO together, hospital, everything, you name it, to coordinate ourselves around the abused women and children. I don't know if we will manage it. We are going to implement it in Agios Dimitrios municipality. And after some months, we will let you know, Sofia is also participating, what happened, who accept to participate in the pilot phase and who not, who doesn't.
We will be eager to hear more about this in the future. And Natalia, one last question for you. Talking about these issues in communities such as the one that we find ourselves being a part of today is part of the solution. How can communities come together to better combat gender-based violence?
Well, first of all, we should raise awareness, those who can raise awareness, and promote networking and especially coming from initiatives coming from either sector, or public or private, or NGOs, as it has already been said. And I think that companies and organizations should exercise their community role in society, leading the way and exchange views and practices as we are doing here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and hopefully that's exactly what we did with this discussion and your fascinating insights into the topic. Thank you very, very much, and thank you to our audience for listening to us.